Hello and welcome to the 16th episode of the Pirate Rugby Pod. We have now passed 350 YouTube subscribers, and our next stop is 400. Our audio downloads also hit their highest ever levels this week on both the main pod and the Friday Breakfast mini pod. So thank you to everyone for tuning in. If you like what we do, please like, share, and subscribe. It helps us to grow. Over to you, Hugh.
A reminder, you can find us on Twitter and sign up to our free Substack. Links for both are below. If you follow us, you'll get updates every time we drop a new piece of content, whether it be a podcast, a video, or a long form article. Stay tuned for a piece later this week on rugby attendances in the URC, which should be dropping hopefully on Thursday night. You can also get Enda's vital rugby TV guide that he does email straight to your inbox. But now, I am delighted to welcome our guest for this week. He could have been anywhere in the world, but he's here with us, and we appreciate that. It's Nyasha from the Quickstop F1 podcast. Nyasha, welcome.
Oh my God. I can't believe you flipped my own intro on me. I love that. Thank you for having me. And also congrats on getting to, what's that, 250 subscribers in 16 episodes. 350 in 16 episodes. That's incredible. I think it took us, gosh, we were like nowhere near that after 16 episodes. So honestly, congratulations on that. That's a really cool feat. And thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much. So,
Thanks, mate.
Nyasha, we like to start our pod with our rugby moment of the week. Do you have a moment of the week? It doesn't have to be rugby related. It can be literally anything in life.
You know what? Honestly, I'm not gonna lie to you. I don't really have like a moment of the week. My TikTok feed essentially is still all just South African rugby celebration. So like I'm just still reliving like everything. I'm not in the future yet. I'm still way in the past. So to be fair, my rugby moment is just the incredible social media content that's still being churned in front of my eyes from South Africa, and it's all pretty much old now. But TikTok's still feeding it to me, so that's all I've got, I'm afraid.
Once it knows what you like, it sticks with it. How about
you,
Enda?
I think for me, it had to. We actually said this on last week's pod, which was so cool. We said that Zebra as our Benetton much improved this season, and to see Zebra get that win against the Sharks, it was 12-10 in the end, was just something else. It was their first win in 18 months, and to do it at home against a big name too. Like we know, we can get onto it later, that the Sharks have had a really poor start to the season. But to see them beating them 12-10 was just magnificent. And seeing them with their fans afterwards, one of them had a flare. They were all singing. Like it was like they'd won the cup final. Seeing the clips in the change room as well. So I think that's just great for this league. And it's great for Italian rugby. And then to see as well Benetton maintain their unbeaten win as well. So two Italian teams winning on the same weekend, you rarely see that. So I think that was really special for me. And yeah, URC is the best league, I think.
Yeah, great. I've seen them all like crying and like letting off blue and yellow flares in the stands and things like. And like, if they haven't won in 18 months, did they bring the flares to every game? And just like,
they must do it now.
Yeah, exactly. Or did they just have them? Someone had them and handed out.
What about yourself, mate? What was your moment of the week?
So mine was a slightly perverse one. So I was watching Toulon against Racing, which is a great game. And Noah Lolesio, the Australian fly half, plays for Toulon at the moment. And he was having a great game. But for some reason, rather than calling him Lolesio, the commentator kept calling him Lolesio, which I don't know whether he thought because he signed for a Mediterranean club, he now has to change his name to be more Mediterranean. But it's literally for the whole 80 minutes. And like the co-commentator next to him didn't correct him. And it was just like, kept saying his name over. It's like, oh, another great play from Lolesio there. And it's like, that's not his name, man. What are you doing? You think that covering like English language coverage of the French league that you'd get some commentator on who really knew the stuff, but no, just read it off the sheet and was like, no, I'm saying it like that. So there we go. Anyway, so Nyasha, obviously you're best known for your work on Quickstop F1. But the reason we've got you on is because I'd noticed that you'd interacted a bit with some rugby content on Twitter. So tell us a bit about your relationship with rugby. How much into it are you? Have you played the game?
Yeah, so when I was I think pretty much probably how I got into F1, and we may talk about this later down the line, is, really lucky that, I mean, and it still is now, but, having rugby, international rugby free to air on TV, when you're a kid, you just kind of soak up all of these things. So as a kid, I would sit in front of the TV. If rugby was on, I would watch it. I'd enjoy it. But when I went to school, I went to a boys' school. I grew up in Hertfordshire. I went to an old grammar school, boys' school, and they kind of just shove rugby down your throat there. We're like, whether you like it or not, like you're going to be playing rugby. And I actually really enjoyed it. And yeah, I played scrum half between the age of like 12 and 15. And then pretty much everyone grew. So what used to be my thing was, at a ruck, I would pick up the ball and just dart off. And like I was pretty quick. And that was like the school's secret strategy, pretty much. And then everyone grew. Like puberty happened, everyone grew, and some of the hits that I was getting were just so bad, and I was getting hurt every week because I just hadn't grown. So I'm pretty small now. You can imagine how small I was when I was 15. And it just got to a point where I was like, I literally cannot play this game until I grow a bit more, or I get a bit better at it, or I have more of an appreciation for it. And I just at that point I stopped playing. But I've always watched it. I mean, like I said, I'm a keen casual. Whenever England are on, I'll watch England. Or I'll try and catch highlights if it's one of the games that are in the morning. Since the whole working from home thing, I'm not going to lie, that's really helped with some of the internationals which are on like in the morning whilst you're at home. So I could just put it on the TV in my office and watch that. So I probably watched more England rugby in like the last, I'd say like 3-4 years than I probably did throughout my whole time, like when I was at uni and before I moved here. So yeah, like I've got a real appreciation for rugby union, especially. Like I love rugby union. I love how tactical and brutal it is, and I just think it's such a delicate game with the hands, but then you've got how massive these guys are and the hits, and every breakdown is so like especially at international level, just so madly contested. And and I think, to be fair, this World Cup really kind of made me fall in love with rugby a bit more. I probably enjoyed this international tournament more, and a lot of that, I think it's probably the first time I've interacted on the social side whilst watching rugby, rather than just texting my friends or just being in the group chat. I've got a group chat with 3 Irish guys, so there's always that kind of chatter around the World Cup or the Six Nations, and it's been really cool to kind of experience it on a global scale, I guess, and that's because of social media.
Yeah, but it's great to talk to someone who sounds really positive about rugby, because most people within rugby are quite negative about it at the moment.
Why is that though? If you don't mind me asking, like why? Because it's quite interesting to hear you say that. So what's is it because of like the rule changes? Is it because of what is it?
It's not so much about the rule changes, really. So the thing that people get upset about a lot is the head contact rules.
Yeah.
But I think I think most rugby people on Twitter now are kind of past that now, because it's been since before the last World Cup, all that stuff came in.
Yeah, of course.
So it's really just some of the older pundits really who are not on board with it. But part of the reason for getting you on was like talking about the contrast between what Rugby Union is doing and what Formula One is doing, because obviously Formula One has exploded in popularity over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So so just kind of on that subject about what people being negative on Twitter and things, I don't know, one of the things that has been really talked about recently is the lack of access that content creators have got to rugby footage. So when people like Squid's Rugby are trying to make videos and things about the games and things, they're being taken down because they're copyright strikes. So obviously I've watched a lot of your content, and I think you've started using like really short clips in some stuff. But
Yeah. In the podcast, I actually just noticed that. So I normally listen and I trust my editor, and I put it on the other day. I was like, oh my god, there's fucking clips in this. I was not expecting that, but we're getting away with it. So yeah, I mean, we'll see how long we get away with that. I think the bigger we get, we'll see. But I mean, F1R, it's a weird one, Hugh. I'm not gonna lie. In terms of creator content access, for example, I'll give you a great example. I don't know if you remember, I think it was Monaco, where Martin Brundle spoke to like this old old photographer, like a senior photographer lady, and she was really chatty. And then afterwards, she was like, "Oh, can I have your card or something?" and I filmed it on my phone. So I rewound at my TV, filmed it on my phone, put some kind of music over the top and subtitles, went to upload it on YouTube Shorts that day. I mean, it can't have been, I don't even think the session had finished it when I'd went to upload it. Literally wouldn't let me upload it. Banned, can't do it.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah. Whereas TikTok, Insta, obviously Twitter, it's open season on F1 content. Like you can use pretty much anything. They rarely take down. The only time I've seen them taking down stuff on Twitter is after Abu Dhabi, and I think they wanted to quell the uprising, let's say, and that's the only time I've seen F1 footage taken down there. So, but on YouTube, they're funny. Some stuff you can use clips. Some people do use clips in their videos and they're fine. Some people use clips in their videos and they don't. I think if they're really short and they're not 1080 by 1920, you can kind of escape their thing, which is good. But I mean, we'd all like more. I think, if you compare F1 to, let's say, I don't know. I watch some football podcasts and they have like a bit more access than we do. But then again, some of that's still bad. But it'd be nice to have more. But we definitely, I would say, yeah, compared to how you're describing it, I think we definitely have it a lot better than rugby.
Yeah, and just on F1 socials generally, a lot of people in rugby Twitter are like, "Oh, rugby Twitter's the worst. Rugby Twitter's the worst." I feel like Formula One Twitter is another level in terms of brutality, having experienced both. Because when I first started my Twitter account, I think that's when you first followed me, is I started doing...
you were doing threads, weren't you? Like
Twitter
data
threads.
threads.
I was doing threads on Formula One and like and like saying this to yourself, like you'll be like, "Oh, tell me about it." But I didn't have a photo of me. I didn't have a photo of me as my first Twitter profile, and I was tweeting pro Lewis Hamilton stuff, and I was getting loads of different kinds of abuse, and I was like, and I was like, I'm a heterosexual white guy. Like,
yeah, no, it is. I mean, honestly, I've got a friend who has a tennis podcast. I'd say they're two black people who have a tennis podcast, and if you see some of the stuff that I see on tennis Twitter, I'm like, Jesus, this is supposed to be, Wimbledon, classy, but the great thing about Twitter is you are able to find your tribe quite easily and quite quickly, and there is that kind of real-time interaction which enables communities to foster, which I think is great, and I'll never kind of poo-poo that side of Twitter. But F1 Twitter is, I would say, like a little microcosm of, I would say, how society kind of plays out. And I think I did kind of see a little bit of this in the World Cup, I'm not going to lie, and we'll get back to it, but it is like a kind of microcosm of like society, of like politics, right? And you have like Lewis Hamilton, and if you don't watch F1, Lewis Hamilton's very much an advocate for civil rights and equality and climate change and animals. He's a vegan. He likes fashion. Like, he's very much on the left side of what I'd say is the political spectrum or whatever. And then you've got someone who's like Max Verstappen, who's obviously, the champion at the moment, 3-time champion, the most informed driver in the league. He is very kind of like traditional. I'm an F1 driver. He doesn't really, never really supports any kind of civil rights kind of, or equality or diversity movements. And, his fans kind of mirror that and mimic that. And there's a lot of that undertone in any kind of discussion which comes up around Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen or Red Bull. And it's fucking, if you don't mind me saying, sorry, but it's pretty brutal. Like, it's pretty brutal. Like, I obviously, as a Black content creator, I mean, yeah, I'm almost not numb to it now, but it's definitely got my skin a lot thicker because it's crazy out there. But I think that's Twitter, man. Twitter it's so good, but it's so bad. Like,
Yeah.
And you've got to take everything with a pinch of salt.
Yeah. That's how me and Enda met and started doing this. So me and Enda have never met in real life. So that's how we
Nice. No, but that's good. I love that. Me and Tandy never met in real life before. We never had a conversation before the first podcast. So I'd obviously messaged her and been like, do you want to do this? I'd seen her talk about Formula One and we'd interacted. And I was like, do you want to do this podcast? And we met for the first time. I think she came out for dinner at some point during the season, or she came out for a party at some point during the season. That was like after 4 or 5 months. And that was the first time we met. And, it's gone from there. I think that's cool that you guys met through a shared interest, right? And then you're building a platform, and then more people are coming to that, right? And as you're kind of intimating, I think rugby needs more of that, to be honest.
Yeah. So one thing on socials that I think rugby needs more of, and it's something that Formula One does and has started doing, something I can't understand why rugby doesn't do it, because it's got the, shall we say, the assets to do it, is thirst traps. So
yes,
F1 has really lent hard into doing thirst traps and F1 drivers and things. And then we saw there was one clip in the World Cup of Sia Khaleesi lifting up Jesse Creel in the air, and it went mad.
That went
and
viral,
I was like,
it?
why? With, like we said, with rugby, they got these like huge men that are absolutely ripped, and they're like, they don't even try. Whereas Formula One's obviously had huge success doing that.
You know what? It's actually crazy. I think with rugby, I think you've got rugby as a whole. So the World Cup and the federation, whoever runs rugby. What's your plan to get younger people into rugby? But what's the plan to get younger people to be able to find out who these people are and like their personalities? And I think that's what Formula One, yes, the thirst trapping, they've gone in on that. And you know what? Fine. Do that. The more they do that, it's crazy. Look, if you come to one of our live shows, the majority of the people who come to our live shows are women. And, if you'd asked me when I was a kid, or even before I started the podcast, did I think that a large proportion of women watched F1? I would have said no, purely because of how it was advertised and how, the people I saw in the stands or whatever. But it's really changed. And I think that's because I think Drive to Survive, if any sport didn't deserve it but got it, it's Formula One. They lucked upon Drive to Survive. They were going to do a season review documentary. The top 2 teams, Mercedes and Ferrari, wanted no parts of it. They only had 8 teams, 16 drivers, 16 drivers to work with. So they said, you know what? Let's concentrate on these lesser known people and we'll bring their personalities to the fore. Lo and behold, people now connect with these drivers, whether that's physically or their personalities and whatever, and it's helped to grow the sport, and they've been able to capitalize off that. And now every other sport has come out with a documentary series of some sort. But the social media side of thing, yeah, F1 have really kind of tapped into that because they were in a pretty bad place with Bernie anyway. And I think there's lessons there for rugby if they can look at, okay, how can we, I mean, even tennis is doing a great job of it. I see some of the TikToks from like tennis and they're so like on the nail for like Gen Z and whatever they're watching. I feel old looking at some of the tennis tournament TikToks. But if that's the thing, right? Capitalizing on, like I say, these great assets, but some of them are great personalities as well. There's personalities in every team, and there's stories in every team as well that can be brought to life. And that's what kind of helps things, right? Stories and narratives. And I think it's a shame that they're not doing more.
Yeah, it's something that you alluded to there. Oh, just quickly, I did a tweet once comparing rugby players to tennis players, and tennis Twitter found it and they did not like it. And I found out. But on Drive to Survive, so I think that's a huge thing. So Enda, obviously people might be thinking now, didn't rugby try to do a Drive to Survive with the Six Nations? But it's been kind of lost, or it feels a bit lost at the moment, or people aren't quite talking about it. So do you know what the latest with that is?
There's no official release date yet, but it's expected to be early 2024. So just like with Drive to Survive, they'll probably release it a week or 2 or 3 before the Six Nations starts to build up the hype, because it'll get more people watching it then. And then obviously if people watch the show, then watch Six Nations, then they'll want to come back for more because they are doing it again the following year. But it's going to be really interesting to see how rugby does it, because we're a very private sport in terms of like I read that the Irish team like didn't give much access at all to the team room, to the dressing rooms, for obvious reasons as well, I think. And I also read the Irish Times did a piece, like the RFU, for example, only got a little over 100k for this access. So I don't know how much, and obviously that's the first year of it, and we'll see how it goes. I think it's due to increase next year, but it's not going up by much more at all. So yeah, I think what you'll see in that is potentially what you mentioned there is like, will say Italy, for example, will they give more access? Will that piece on Italy be more interesting than the Irish bit? I don't know. Even though Ireland were Grand Slams, but I think it might be something like that as well. Whoever gives probably the most access will turn out to be the most interesting, or the team that will maybe grow on the back of it the most. But it's going to be fascinating because rugby doesn't really do this that often. So I can't wait to see how it plays out, and to see if it's successful. Because I think like Drive to Survive, like I'll be honest, it's gotten me into F1 now. Maybe not so much this season, but it got me, like I subscribed to Sky Sports, I bought it, and I was getting up to watch practice right through till race day on Sunday, like nice. And I'd never watched it before just because of this show. But has it been that successful? I guess, like, because I know they did a golf one, they've done a tennis one. Like, I think Drive to Survive, for whatever reason, was just a massive hit, but I don't think it's possible just to like replicate it for every sport, is it?
No, you're really right there, and I'm so happy that you kind of got into F1 from that. It's crazy. Like, people forget though, like, obviously Drive to Survive started in 2019 was the first season, and then I think season 2 was 2020, which came in the middle of the pandemic, like, it was starting to happen. So you had the season, and then obviously Formula 1 stopped for like 4 or 5 months. And then what Formula 1 was really lucky about was that it was the first international sport to go back after lockdown, or even during lockdown. Yeah. So you had this thing of everyone at home watching Drive to Survive because there was no live sport. Something similar happened to me. I watched The Last Dance during lockdown, and that's got me massively into basketball now. Like, I love basketball. I wouldn't even give basketball a time of day before I watched The Last Dance, and then I watched that. It kind of got me into it. And I think Formula 1 had, like I said, this lightning in a bottle set of circumstances. And then obviously when they came back, they would, all eyes were on Formula 1. And it was an okay season. And then obviously we have the 2021 season, which was the greatest season of all time. And I keep saying to people, don't think that's going to happen again. Like, I've watched this sport. I've watched this sport for like, I don't know now. I'm embarrassed to say like 29 years, 28 years. I've watched Formula One. It will never be that good again. And even if it does become close between Red Bull and Mercedes and Max and Lewis again, the novelty of it being the first time and everything that was around that will never happen again. So what I do think rugby has on its side is that, one, I do think that they've got, like I said, like there are some interesting characters within rugby. They are all strapping, handsome young men. Let's not beat around the bush. That is good. Like I think I said, like I'm up for the yassification of F1. Get these guys topless. I don't care. Like if it brings more eyes on the sport, let's absolutely sexualize these guys. I don't care. We know what they do. We can see their talent. We're not saying we want to diminish how dangerous and how skillful that, how dangerous the sport is and how skillful they are. But let's engage everyone in every way. Let's show them the skill. Let's show them the personalities. Let's try and highlight the stories. And I think you're really right in that it'll be interesting to see what the effect is after the first season in terms of who gives access, what that results in, who's able to kind of grow and who's able to capitalize off their new fan base and a different fan base maybe than they're used to having, who's able to kind of take that and go forward. I think Ferrari are a great example. If you look at their social media, how that's changed over the years to now being like an incredibly like younger voice than it was before. Aston Martin as well have got great social media, especially their video content. So yeah, we'll see.
I can imagine the France national team doing really well out of a lot of behind the scenes topless stuff, because especially someone like Roman Antonak or someone like that,
Yeah.
that's going to explode. Enda, what about? It's interesting to hear you talk there about you paid the money to Sky to watch Formula One off the back of DTS. Obviously, with rugby, the big thing is a lot of people are desperate to keep it on free to air, and Nash has just talked about how he was able to follow the World Cup based on it being on free to air. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that kind of debate, mate.
I think it's just all about striking the right balance. But then, like, you often say this, like, I think if you look at the URC, for example, to me, it's struck the perfect balance in Ireland where you can follow the Irish provinces for free, but if you want to watch all the games, you have to pay. And I think there's a good balance there, especially when you look at the viewing figures. But then you also look at sports like football that's been behind a paywall for I don't know how long, yet they get ridiculously good. Like you've got Man United, one of the biggest teams in the world. You've got unbelievable viewership numbers. You've got massive attendances at games, and like you have to pay for every single one of those games. Like 0 of those games are basically on free to air, and that's worked. But obviously, football is in a completely different league, and even with F1. I think it's is it only the English Grand Prix that's basically
just the British Grand Prix,
on free to air. Everything else is on Sky, yet it's still seeing really strong viewing figures. And then you look at sports like cricket, where apparently cricket took a massive hit when it went behind a paywall and stuff. So it's hard to know, and does it just depend on the sport and on where that sport is at in its development. But I think at the moment rugby is certainly in a development phase, and it needs to keep the majority of the big games like Six Nations, World Cup. I think for me they have to stay on free to air, but with maybe some of the club games, I think if they get most of the games on pay TV, and then some of the big local derbies and stuff on free to air, I think that's key. But at some stage as well, especially when you look at the English game, these teams need to start making money and they need to start signing big TV deals. And unfortunately, that's reality. Like it's all great, well and good if loads of people are watching the game, but is that increasing people going to games? Is that increasing the revenue of those clubs? Or are they better off just signing a massive TV deal and getting that payout from, say, the likes of TNT Sports? So I think that's the balance. Like everyone's for growing the game, but at the end of the day, like look at the English rugby situation. They need cash hard. Like they need cash right now. And I'm not sure if they're necessarily going to get that putting more games on free to air. It might grow interest in the game, and which should in turn, build the sport and everything. But they need money right now. And I think that's where the TV deals really come in. I'll probably answer that in a roundabout way, but I just think where rugby's at the moment, I think it needs to keep that balance, and it's a fine balance. But rugby also needs the money right now. especially with
Yeah.
the litigation that's coming down the road.
Well, yeah. So we'll come. I want to come back to the money and given to teams and things, because that's a hot topic in Formula One at the moment. But I just want to quickly touch on something that we talked about supporting the individuals and growing the individuals. So Nyasha, I think it's fair to say in Formula One that people, the majority of people, with the exception probably of Ferrari and I'd say some McLaren fans, all support a driver rather than a team. Like for me, I'm support Lewis Hamilton, and if Lewis Hamilton went to a different team, I'd still support Lewis Hamilton. Is that fair to say? And does that have any kind of downsides? I don't know.
You know what? I think, look, I can't really talk too much about club rugby because it's not really my area of expertise and so forth. But I think, well, what I probably would say is, yes, sorry, in F1, people support a person, not a team. Unless, like I say, McLaren have got a very strong team kind of thing because they're a heritage team. Ferrari, of course. And what I want to say, because Ferrari is like a national kind of thing. That's like an Italian kind of thing, right? A lot of the Ferrari fans are Italian, and it is like an Italian thing. And there's no one bigger than Ferrari because Ferrari is the brand. Pardon me. So it's one of those, isn't it? Yeah, like I do think that what helps rugby is that nationalistic kind of, if you had the World Cup and you've got like all of these essential like Ferraris essentially, and everyone is, if you look at like the sense of like the way that the whole of South Africa gets behind South Africa's national team, like they're gonna have they're gonna have a national holiday in December because they've won the World Cup. Like such was like the fervor and how they've got behind. Never mind the cricket team's doing really well, like as well. So and the women's team won the I think the ladies AFCON. So like I think if you can look at how South Africa is able, and obviously there's a lot of things with that in terms of how South Africa is as a country and the poverty and just the way that it's run, and sport really being that kind of escapism for a lot of people. But there's no reason why. I remember when Johnny Wilkinson dropped gold, that that final score against Australia, and I remember that feeling. I stayed up to watch that feeling of nationalistic pride and being English and cheering the boys on. Then there's no reason why each rugby association shouldn't be trying to drum up that sense of national kind of interest in the team, and there needs to be an involvement of that beyond purely sticking the game on free to air and hoping people tune in. How can we engage with younger people from grassroots level to online and so forth? But as Enda's clearly pointed out, money talks at the end of the day, and a lot of people are saying, if I'm going to do X, what am I getting back in Y? And it's hard to kind of measure that with social media numbers.
Yeah, but I guess we've got that in football has managed to kind of break that in some cases, because you got Ronaldo and Messi, and there was like when Ronaldo went from Real Madrid to Juventus, there was 1 million social media followers did that switch with him. And then I've just finished watching the Beckham documentary. There must be
Jesus,
plenty of people because I remember I learned the word celebrity when I was a kid. And they're like, I was like, what's a celebrity? And they're like, David Beckham is a celebrity. Like that's how I learned that word. So there must be rugby players now. Like I think Lewis Rees-Zammit, from the Welsh winger, is looking at that Beckham documentary right now and thinking, I'd quite like something like that.
Yeah. I mean, like the thing is, in England in rugby, we've kind of had that, haven't we? Like, Johnny Wilkinson, kind of people who kind of transcend beyond like the national team, for better or worse, right? Yeah. I think on the good side, Johnny Wilkinson. On a bad side, I remember Danny Cipriani being a celebrity, but not really too much for the sporting side, more for what he was doing off the field. And it does happen in football for sure. It does, I think. And again, though, that's a lot of the younger people are doing that. So I think a lot of the younger people who get into football, I follow a lot of the people, some of the people who follow the F1 pod, and younger people who are, maybe they live in America, or maybe they're younger people in London. Like, there's young people in London supporting Manchester City because they love Haaland, or there's young people now supporting Real Madrid because they love Jude Bellingham. Like, do you know what I mean? So there's definitely a more individualistic, and with F1 you kind of have to, because you've got there's only like 20 people to choose from, and there's 10 teams, and they kind of shove the drivers down your throat, so you're kind of like, you do choose that. But I do think there is like a more individualistic kind of thing, especially with people making their own social media profiles and so forth. So again, rugby needs to start capitalizing on it. Who are the stars in your team? Who are the marketable people in your team? Get them front and center, and watch your popularity grow, even just by association.
Yeah, I think talking about the teams as well. In Formula One, we've been learning kind of accidentally over the last year to start viewing the teams as franchises rather than privateers, with this new structure.
Yeah.
Like when we're looking at how Andretti are trying to join, and it's being seen as they would be coming in and diluting. And I think Enda, that kind of leads us on to a question from Martin Lewis, one of our listeners, about how NFL handles that, because they do themselves as franchises, whereas in the URC, we've kind of ended up with that sort of half by accident, in that there's no promotion relegation.
Yeah.
So in Formula One, there's a debate at the moment about how any new entrant would have to pay a huge dilution fee to the other teams. Enda, is that something that kind of rugby is already doing, or is having to do now, or is there any kind of similar situation in our sport?
Well, if you look at the results from the SA, Rugby Union's, South Africa Rugby Union's kind of financials for 2022, one of the main reasons they didn't do too well was because of the massive fees that they allegedly paid to join the URC and to join the EPCR tournaments as well. So obviously that there were massive fees involved there. Now the question is, where did that money go? Like, did that money go directly to the URC and directly to the EPCR, and then that money was distributed out, to all the participating clubs? Or did that money just go to the prize money, or did it go towards the the costs of hosting additional games and all that? I'm not quite sure. And maybe that will come to light quite soon. But I know that, from South Africa's perspective, it has cost them an awful lot to join the European competitions. But obviously, I think based on what we've seen on the field, it's definitely been a massive success. But there is a cost involved with that. But then in turn as well, what you have to remember, it's the same with the NFL. Like, you do add more teams, you add a new market, and that's been the biggest win, I think, for the URC. It is the new market. And like, you look at the population of South Africa, one of the reasons now we've got a higher TV rights deal than the English Premiership is because we have those TV rights from SuperSport in South Africa. So it is quite similar in that sense. But I'm not quite sure that those fees that they paid to join would trickle down into each individual club, but probably certainly to the unions or to the competition administrators, which will benefit every club in reality. But we also know that South Africa Rugby are paying for the costs of travel for the franchise at the moment, so that's another massive burden on them. But again, yeah, look, it's a really interesting one, but who knows, kind of, because I know that is supposed to end after the 2024-2025 season, where SA Rugby are stop funding all of the travel, etc. So it'd be interesting to see what happens to the clubs and where that'll go from there. But maybe that's a side point. But yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, South Africa definitely paid fees to join the European competitions, but not quite sure where that money went. But I think everybody would probably agree, maybe certainly from a URC perspective, that it's been highly beneficial for all stakeholders.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, Nyasha, in terms of growing the sport as well, Formula One is currently working so hard to grow into the USA. And with the whole Andretti thing, they're kind of trying to portray that as like a Team America, even though we've already got Haas, which is an American team officially. So what have you made of Formula One's like almost desperate kind of attempts really to break the US market?
Man, I mean, it's crazy because they are so desperate to break that market. I think they're looking at they look at it and they think, look, I'll give some insight. And if my figures are like this, then I'm sure F1s are pretty similar. That I think between 70 and 75% of our merch goes to America. So people are willing to pay the shipping fee from the UK to the US, all over. I'm talking from, North America even. I'm talking from Canada to Mexico, in between in the United States. They are really, really keen on F1, and when they are keen, they spend. And in terms of like the commercial aspect, think of all the companies and conglomerates that are based in America, which you can partner with and so forth. And obviously the motorsport kind of history and culture in America, it does seem like the right move for Formula One. But on the other hand, like I say, they do not want another team in that paddock. And I think the dilution fee before was 200 million, which would be, the 20 mil, well, 200 mil divided by, the 10 teams, so 20 mil each. I think spread over 6 seasons or something. But, they're now saying basically that's going to have to go up to 600 mil. And even then, I don't think they really want. I think they're saying 600 mil, and maybe Andretti are saying, yeah, okay, we'll pay it, and they're like, oh, it's not enough. So it's a tough one, because I do think F1 does need to crack America to keep this level of growth going. It's the biggest growth market available. I don't think they're doing enough to do that, especially having just been to a race in America. I don't think they're doing enough to really penetrate that market from an entertainment point of view and value for money point of view either.
Okay, that's interesting. So talking about the reason that they're probably wanting to hold off letting that other team in is because they're looking at that graph going up in the value, and they're thinking, oh, however much we charge, we could wait 5 years and it's turn out not to be enough. Enda, I know you were looking at some data, and I know you wanted to ask about some of the social interaction with Formula One that looks like potentially maybe it's peaked.
Yeah, I did see recently that the social interactions or whatever for F1 have just fallen off a cliff recently. Now I don't know if that's a combination of a couple of things. I'm sure it is, but obviously this season it's been very uncompetitive. Do you put those figures down to that, or are people getting kind of sick and tired of F1, or a drive to survive, or where do you think the sport's at? Like, were you surprised when you saw those figures?
No, not at all. But for a variety of reasons. Look, I think I saw the same figures, and there were a lot more. Social interactions had gone down. There were a lot more negative words associated with Formula One than there was before. But again, like I said, I think this is taking on board like the 2022 season. So if you think about 2022 compared to 2021, again, we had a once in a generation title battle. That was our Senna Prost, which was what, 88, 89? Yeah. So that was our, and that was, so what we're talking
33 years.
Yeah, 33 years later, right? So, it was always going to go down. However, what the problem is, you got all these fans, and the 2020 season, whilst it was dominated by Mercedes, there were some crazy races. You had the pile up at Mugello, you had George Russell nearly getting a win in Bahrain, you had even, I remember, even in Silverstone, Lewis had three tires. Wheels. Verstappen won a week later randomly, he just be
Lewis's history making in Turkey as well. That's like one of my favorite all-time races.
Yeah, oh mate, I was bawling my eyes out. So 2020 still had, and again, because of the fact that it was the only sport on TV pretty much for a long time, it had so many eyes on it, and it was still quite positive. 2022, you've got a lot of fans who are either new to the sport or watching and they're like, hang about, there's not that much overtaking. There's, the same person after 6 or 7 races is winning all the races. I think he won a record, 15 races last season out of 22. So, and this season he's already on 16, 17. So, it's going to go down until, as good as the fight for second place to 20th is great, I think until a point where there's a genuine fight for first place, whether that's between 2 Red Bulls or between Mercedes Red Bull, McLaren Red Bull, whatever, I do think that's going to continue. People are checking out already. Vegas is happening and no one cares. And that's really worrying for F1. They've not sold nearly as many tickets they thought they would, and I guess taking it back to that US kind of thing, that growth chart is not going the way that they thought. They thought they'd be able to fleece people for 800 grand rooms, and unfortunately that's not been the case.
Yeah, interestingly though, Enda, in rugby you could argue that there has been domination, because it's either the All Blacks or South Africa have won 7 out of the 10 or 11 World Cups there's ever been. Yet for some reason rugby as a sport that isn't seen as being dominated as much, even though you've got someone like Saracens in the English Premiership who has dominated it, or you've got whoever. I don't know, is there a parallel to be drawn there, or do you think it's not a comparable situation?
I think it's probably not too comparable, just because of the sheer number of competition, especially in the club game. But even in like the Six Nations, you've got the Rugby Championship, you've got the World Cup every 4 years. Like there's enough. Like even if say one team was dominant, like you could argue like South Africa, they won the last World Cup, and oh god, they won this one. But like it's almost there's now almost more interest in rugby because of the story behind South Africa. Now even more people have heard about them. But I think they're just like, and this is one of the things that kind of crops up every time people talk about broadcasting rights in rugby, saying, look, there should just be one rugby streamer. But how could there possibly be with the number of competitions that there are, the different time zones, blah blah blah? Like that'll never happen, I don't think. But it's kind of like the NFL as well. Like it's just one major league, when it's like an F1, it's F1, and like obviously there's F2 and F3 and all that. But with rugby, there are just so many different competitions, even at international level. Now we've seen a new one emerge that's going to start shortly. So I don't think there's maybe that domination that we could see, maybe not ruin, but make people lose interest in every sport. But definitely, I think in probably the club game, I'd say that is the situation. Like I'd be interested, love to see what Leinster's viewing figures are like in the URC, because does anybody enjoy the same team winning week in, week out? I don't think so.
Leinster have never won the URC, mate. I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, so a bit of a slightly different question now, Nyasha. So something that I really like about what you guys do on Quickstop is that you're very clear that you are fan content rather than journalists, which is something that I've been quite keen to put out, because I've had a couple of, because I have on podcasts openly admitted to being biased. I have gone, I think this, but I would think that because that's the team that I support, so I'm biased. And some people don't like that. So what is your kind of approach to doing fan-led content?
Honestly, I'd love to be neutral and unbiased. I just cannot do it. Like I just can't. And so the approach is just authentic content. And I think, look, I grew up like, I've kind of seen the beginning of fan-led online content from the start. So I remember watching, the kind of early football. So, I used to have a football blog. I used to write every day. I used to have an Arsenal blog, and I used to write in that Arsenal blog every day for like 4 years, because to this day, since like 2008, I wake up in the morning, I have a cup of tea, and I read an Arsenal blog called Arseblog, which has got me into trouble at work, but it's just an Arsenal blog. But I still have that kind of routine of consuming fan-led content, and that's kind of carried on into online, the podcasts. The only The only other podcasts that I really listen to is is an Arsenal podcast. To be honest, I hardly listen to F1 podcasts anymore, because I consume so much F1. I just want to get away from it, to be honest. So, I guess my answer is, it is fine in absolutely every other sport in the world: football, NFL, NBA. I'm sure there's some cricket stuff. I'm sure whatever. But in the big sports, in the sports which have got the major television deals and the major fan bases, there is fan-led content from teams from the top divisions down to the bottom divisions. I find it so weird, the pushback that we get being an F1 fan-led content. And to be honest, it's mostly because of who we're a fan of, not the fact that we're fan content. I think if we were a Red Bull, look, there's a really good podcast from two former Red Bull engineers who I'm sure make no bones about who they support. One of them was a former Max Verstappen engineer, and no one cares about that. It's fine. And I love those guys. Pick up Blake and Dan. But I just think F1, we kind of spoke about Drive to Survive, and maybe this is the same as rugby. It's a bit behind in terms of its social kind of maturation of what people expect from media. F1 media is traditionally very down the middle, knowledge based, tech based. They are almost like journalistic reporting. We kind of came in, and maybe we were the first ones to be like, F that, we're just going to say whatever we want to say, we're going to do whatever we want to do. And I think that's helped us to grow and get fans like yourself, Huw, which I really appreciate, and to get the fan base that we've got. And I think we've inspired a lot of other people within the sport to do the same. So I think it's just a matter of maturation of the online family or world. And I think rugby will go through the same thing, and especially look, even the teams, like you say, and are kind of pushing back on the access that they're giving for these things, probably because they don't think that, why would we give access to this? We've got secrets, we've got, we're private people. But, I think the more they realize that this is what people want, then the more people will ask for it and the more people will do it. And that includes independent content creators as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I've got one more question, mate. I don't know, Enda, if you've got one. Do you want to squeeze in before I go for it?
I think we went through everything on the list. Yeah, I'm happy with my questions so far.
Okay, great. So, Nyasha, my last question is: if you were appointed to a board to advise Rugby Union on how to grow the game, based on what you've seen Formula One do, what would be the one thing where you'd be like, guys, do this tomorrow? And what would be the one thing where you'd be saying, do not under any circumstances do this?
I think what I would do is look at so who am I working for again? Is it like the whole of rugby, or just
the whole of Rugby Union as a sport?
Whole of rugby? I think what I would say is look at how companies are engaging successfully in using content to drive product with a younger crowd who are willing to spend money on merch, who are willing to spend money on tickets to see their faves. How can we create a relationship between these incredible athletes and these people who just want to watch incredible live sport? There were some incredible matches during the World Cup, and there were some incredible storylines. How can we get that from the pitch to people's phones and social media, trending and talking? Yes, there's going to be an element of the, whatever, like the sexy stuff, whatever, cool. But it's the stories and it's the people. How can we create those human stories? And I think if they can crack that, whether that's hiring people who are used to doing it, who have done it, or hiring people who have worked in teams who have done that. Maybe it's not the top person because you can't afford that, but is there someone within these teams who's got knowledge of, the processes of how to do this and wants a shot at, running something like this. Just find a fucking 16-year-old on the street and tell him to make fan cams. I don't know, but within that, try and find a way to engage in this, with the world, because they've got an incredible product. It's quite, like I said, as a casual, I thoroughly enjoyed the World Cup, and I think I thoroughly enjoyed it because I was in tune with the stories and the narratives and everything that was kind of going on, and the drama and the memes, and that's what makes it fun. That's what makes F1 fun for me. So much more fun with the online community than it is just watching it at home in my joggers on my sofa / in bed, depending on what time it is. So yeah, that's what I would recommend. Don't, under any circumstance, let teams not give access to camera crews. You've got to give access for the good of the sport. We've got to go beyond. Of course, maybe you don't look at Arsenal. Arsenal did a whole all or nothing documentary, and if I could tell you the way that Mikel Arteta was perceived before that documentary, and how he was perceived afterwards, and how someone like Bukayo Saka was perceived before and after, and just the way Arsenal were kind of looked at as a club, radically changed. And there was some very tender moments in the dressing room. Now, was there any big tactical giveaways? No, there wasn't. But did we get to see some really heartfelt moments? Yes. Were we able to empathize with certain people and kind of become closer to them or feel closer to them because we knew their stories more? Yes. So I would say, teams are not allowed to not give access to camera, because they're cutting their own nose off to spite their face. And I think that's, we want the sport to grow. We want to engage as many people as possible. We need access. No one's allowed to not give access.
And just on that, actually, I have to praise South Africa, because they did this with the Chasing the Sun documentary after they won the last World Cup. I don't know if either guys have seen it. It's absolutely brilliant, and it gives that, and it gets into some of those players' backgrounds, and you see what they're playing for. And I think that's the type of, obviously South Africa's an outlier in that sense, but that was brilliant access, and I've heard they've done the same now. For the most recent World Cup. So I think that's the type of content, if we get more of that in rugby. I don't know what you think, but for me, that's a great example of something I watched.
Perfect example.
And now they're probably my second favorite national team, just because I know more about those players and what they play for and where they've come from, all those. Yeah. And you get to see a bit of their character, especially the coaches as well.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's not, look, Hugh, Gunther Steiner has become his own thing off the back of drives, and as well, as well, and it's not just the drivers, it's not just the players, it's not, it is the coaches, it is the managers, because they are personalities within themselves. It's a team sport, and all of these little elements of the team are what make our sports as great as they are. So I just think the Chasing the Sun documentary is incredible. I can't wait to see this year's, and I think more stuff I can't believe people can look at that, look at how engaged. And again, South Africa is an outlier, but surely you just want a bit of that for yourself. Even if you can't have all of that, surely you just want a bit of that for yourself, right?
I've just remembered that the British and Irish Lions have been doing it since the 90s, which just makes me so confused about how.
Yeah.
Because everyone loves it, and all the rugby players say oh, I grew up watching that, but then no one else has done it. So that kind of tells you that someone's not switched on somewhere,
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Actually, I remember watching, as a kid, watching the Lions documentary, the tour documentary, right?
Yeah.
I do remember watching one. Did someone have it on video at their house? But so hold on. But yeah. And look, it's not just a copy and paste thing, right? Just because South Africa have done one thing or F1 have done one thing, it might not work for you. But like I said, let's just try and find ways of telling these guys stories, of bringing, because I always say with F1, the one thing, if you say to someone, I watch F1, and they're like, oh, it's not just people driving around in a car, and you're like, no. And the thing that Drive to Survive did was it allowed you to see under the helmet, and you're able to see these personalities, and you have an appreciation for them more. If you watch rugby, you might watch, there's 15 people on the field, and obviously you've got replacements and stuff, whatever, but you don't really know who they are, what their positions are, like what that person's done to get into that team, unless you're told by a commentary. Whereas, if it's something that kind of comes up in your screen, or if it's kind of shown on your social media profile and people talking about it, it can only be a good thing.
Completely agree.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to a nice natural conclusion. So Nyasha, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolutely fantastic pod. I'm hopeful that it's going to get the love and appreciation it deserves. So yeah,
Man.
appreciate it, man. And you're welcome back on anytime.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
thanks very much.
I just want to say, guys, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed today. You guys have got an incredible platform, and yeah, just keep going, keep at it, and please have me back on. Well, Six Nations time. Well, I'll come back on then if you'll
We'll hold you
have
to
me.
that.
Yeah, no, please do. Six Nations. If you've got space for me, I'll come back on, and I'd love to break down a game afterwards with you guys. And yeah, thank you. Yeah, just thanks again.
Cool.
Thanks, mate. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, guys.